Welcome, friends who are listening. Welcome, little sister, you who took the initiative for this meeting. We're listening. I would like to point out to our listeners that today is January 7th, 2021. Brothers, I come back to ask you questions at the request of many people who are hoping and also suffering. The last time we discussed these topics together was in 2012, and 9 years have passed since then. As an encouragement for the year 2021, which I imagine will be another year of transition and upheaval, I hope you will accept and answer these questions so as to bring us a bit of balm to those who are aware of your presence. I begin with the first question. They call you Elohim, brothers of the stars, Pleiadians, Venusians, or members of the Galactic Brotherhood, but how do you define yourselves? And which of you is presently incorporating Daniel Meurois to deliver your message? I ask you to explain a bit because it's true that the nature of this luminous incarnation that I'm presently filming is not well understood by many. How we define ourselves? We have already said this, and it has already been written by our brother Daniel here present. We define ourselves very exactly as the servants of the angels of the Lord. It's a term that may seem complicated to you, yet it's the most accurate and explicit. The Elohim that we are not angels, and many people still don't understand this today. Angels are beings who belong to another wave of creation than yours. They are on another plane, which does not mean they cannot intervene in your world, but it's very rare. We, as servants of the angels of the Lord, and we say, Lord, we're of course talking about the infinite, Lord being a practical and overused and much criticized term, we're aware of this, but it also defines what it defines in essence. So, why the servants of the angels of the Lord? Quite simply because we're at the service of life, which passes through a whole hierarchy of luminous beings, but also quite simply because we are your brothers. We belong to the same wave of creation as you. We're human like you. We're not angels, and that's what you very often find very difficult to understand. We're not gods, we're not angels, nor archangels, but brothers and sisters, just a bit older than you, who have moved on to a form of realization that you aspire to, but which is still very difficult for you to realize, as you can see. In this sense, we are in the best position to reach out to you. As for the second part of your question, little sister, who we are, who are currently inhabiting our brother Daniel, we're a group of 3 beings merging into a single voice. It may happen that one of these voices takes over the others, but we operate in a fusional way so that no one personality really takes over. So we are 3 at this moment in a single light presence that inhabits our brother Daniel. I will continue. The earth and its humanity have already experienced major and crucial changes and upheavals during their long history. How is what we've gone through in 2020, and which continues to unfold, different from previous upheavals? As humans, do we have the necessary tools to get through this, especially since we seem to have so little influence on our elected rulers and our governments? In your opinion, do democracies still have a future on Earth? More and more of us are feeling muzzled by every possible means and locked up. There are many questions in one. First of all, regarding the events you've been going through for a number of decades now, we must tell you that from the way we look at it, you believe that you are living in what you call democracies, when in fact you are not. Of course, in many countries you vote, and you think that you decide more or less who are your representatives and who are your defenders. In reality, this is not the case. And the democracies that are yours today are entirely facades. Your opinions are controlled, your sources of information are controlled and distorted, and you're conditioned in an extraordinarily learned way to make you think you are free when you're absolutely not. This is the simplest way we can speak about the world, or rather the worlds in which you live today. In the West, it goes without saying, only one has to look, many feelings of freedom and indeed a certain number of liberties of action are diminishing at galloping speed. The reality is that when you look in depth, your behaviors, choices, and sensitivities are controlled very subtly. And you decide far less than you think. It's in this sense that the teachings that we and others of our brothers, incarnate or not, are justified and must take on their full force today. Our intention is none other to make you a little more adult within yourselves, that is a bit more aware of what is deep within you, rather than the image you have of yourselves and of each other, which are like distorting mirrors. You don't know yourselves, you don't know where you come from, and you hope for a better future without really knowing what that means. We're working to correct all this, and it's a very long-term endeavor. In short, you're not the free men and women you think you are. The freedom you aspire to is a principle that you haven't yet tasted, and which you will come to taste less and less in the years to come. You're not yet at the bottom of that pendulum that marks the passage from one cycle to another. Not quite yet. We know that this is difficult to hear, eternal friends, but what is happening today, and not just today, but yesterday, the day before yesterday, this past year, and that encompasses decades or even more, is crucial for your learning, for you to reclaim your essence and your possible divinization. We say possible because, with all due respect to some ascensionists, the vast majority of earthlings today are still very far from this. For many of you today, you live on different planes, even while you think you live in the same world. Have we answered all your questions, little sister? Yes, and I have others. I'm going to take up some of the answers you've already given, but it's for those who are listening and who are hoping that I will ask them again. Many are very frightened by the enslaving words of governments that the official media are helping to amplify. In their daily information or disinformation, fed by the same narrative of fear and orders, along with fines and threats, the many media outlets censors all legitimate questions regarding the inconsistencies and abuses which we are subjected to. As a result, it's increasingly difficult for us to discern the truth from the lie, and many lose confidence and faith. And I'm not even talking here about the loss of joy of life. We're at the point where world-renowned scientists are being muzzled and arrested. We can only observe this. As you said, our humanity is totally divided into two clans. Those who see the facts, seek them out, denounce them, and are attacked in many ways, and those who seem to be hypnotized by governments and the media. We obviously live in two parallel worlds. How can we get out of this media predicament? Do we have a price to pay as humanity? A kind of obligatory collective karma? Are we at the bottom of the great cosmic pendulum? In 2012, before a small group of us, you had announced the date of 2030 to 2033 as the beginning of the end of this major crisis. And now some governments are announcing the famous date of 2030 for what they call the Great Reset. That is to say, the global plan of world reorganization. So far as we can see, this new plan of social restructuring would take us to an apocalypse of sorts. Does this mean we might remain in this situation with clearly eugenicist and genocidal tendencies for another 10 years and that we will have to endure a growing dictatorship? I know you can't say everything, but could you encourage us? Can we see an upturn? Thank you. Could you, little sister, take up point by point the many questions you've just asked us? Not for us, because it's all very clear, but simply for all your listeners. The questions only or the whole text? All of it, question by question. Many are very frightened by the enslaving words of governments that the official media are helping to amplify. In their daily information or disinformation, fed by the same narrative of fear and orders, along with fines and threats, the many media outlets censor all legitimate questions regarding the inconsistencies and abuses which we are subject to. As a result, it's increasingly difficult for us to discern the truth from the lie, and many lose confidence and faith. And I'm not even talking here about the loss of joy. We're at the point where world-renowned scientists are being muzzled and arrested, and we can only observe this. As you said, our humanity is totally divided into two clans, those who see the facts, seek them out, and denounce them, and are attacked, and those who seem to be hypnotized by governments and the media. We obviously live in two parallel worlds. How can we get out of this media predicament? Everything remains to be answered in all of this. First of all, rather, who to believe or not to believe. Before answering this question, we just want to say that there are not the good guys on one side and the bad guys on the other. Certainly, there are people who are blind, and there are also extremely penetrating eyes. And in the middle of all this, there are the short-sighted. The vast majority of your humanity is short-sighted. The blind are there, of course. And as for those who have the piercing eye, the eye of the eagle mixed with that of the dove, they're a very small minority. So we must not delude ourselves. What this means is that there isn't really any possible dialogue between these three kinds of beings or across these sensibilities. For the moment, there's no real dialogue, quite simply because over the course of decades, centuries, and even millennia, the blind, the short-sighted, and the hypersensitive, we could say, all of you have been developing universes that are parallel, and therefore from which you don't meet. Of course, you meet in the streets, you meet in family reunions and friend reunions, in public spaces, but in reality, you don't meet because you don't have, or you don't function, we would say, to borrow one of your contemporary terms, with the same internal program. You don't have the same software. And again, forgive us for this overly technical term. So you meet without seeing each other and without really speaking to each other. Not on the physical level, but on the psychic level, you are on vibratory frequencies that rub shoulders, but very, very rarely find common points. In periods like the one you're experiencing, the last years, and especially these last times, highlight this fact. The trap would be to fall into a form of confrontation and say, I am right and you are wrong. That's not how it works. That is not how it works. You have to go back to your inner truth. What is the inner truth that dwells in each of you, whatever your sensibility? That is where your heart is. What does your heart perceive? What does it want? What does your heart understand? Everyone's truth is there. And if each one holds dear to the truth of their heart rather than the truth of their mind, then you can hope to begin to meet each other. What does the human being want on this planet? And here we're talking about the human being, not about those who appear to be human, who are human in form, but who have nothing human and have come to destabilize the planet. What does the authentic human being want? Simply happiness. And what is happiness? It's to breathe in freedom, to be able to love in freedom, to be able to create what is within him. Even those who don't feel they have any special abilities have come to this world to create something. It isn't only artists or those who call themselves as such who need to create, because creation is a way of expressing oneself, a way of saying, I exist and I'm useful for something. You need to meet each other in this context, even if you disagree, and there are many reasons why mentally you might disagree. Everyone has an infinite right to express his or her opinion, but sometimes it's better not to express an opinion rather than to sow war. It's a form of wisdom that simply invites discreetness. It's a modesty of the soul. Please understand us, brothers and sisters. We're not saying, say nothing and let anything be done. Not at all. Quite the contrary. When you witness ignominies and scandals, you must not be afraid to point the finger at them, and there are many, many in this world. Yet, we must not let war spring from us, even if sometimes it seems inevitable, even if at times we need to use means that seem belligerent, because a certain type of person needs us to speak the same language they speak, to be able to tell them, stop, this is as far as we go. May those whose eyes remain at the level of their heart and who have an infinite space in their consciousness not let themselves get caught up in the conflict to which they're invited. By conflict, we mean eminently warlike. Of course there's a struggle, and believe it or not, the struggle is as much heavenly as it is earthly. You shouldn't deny this, but make sure that violence never inhabits you. Your freedom and the extension of your field of consciousness depends upon it. Of course, with everything we're saying here, we realize that the vast majority of the short-sighted and the blind, who are in general also deaf, won't hear what we are saying. We know this. And therefore, it is not to them that we are speaking, because it would be useless. It is to those who are beginning to develop a sharper eye and a more refined ear, to all those who aspire to grow, not simply to sleep, eat, work, and eventually take a vacation. It is to those that you are, mostly, here before us. This is who we are addressing. You're responsible not just for the future of your world, but also for the present moment of your world. It's up to you to be masters of yourselves and to call the light into you. Calling for light is not simply praying, meditating. It also leads to concrete actions. Actions of wisdom, actions of non-complicity with what goes against life. We know very well today that light is co-opted by the darkness. That is to say, the darkness is garbed with the appearance of the light. We've been teaching this for a long, long time, and our brother here present has testified to it in his own way. Feel within yourselves what is true and what is not. You may never have an absolute answer because you're humans like us who are susceptible to error. But what seems true to you is above all what makes you a better person. What makes you a better person in what you hear, in what you accept or do not accept? It is a question of vibratory level. When we were telling you a few moments ago that you live in parallel universes that almost never meet, or very seldom, when we were talking about levels of consciousness, this also induces a vibratory level in general, which is that overall level of your planet. What the life force, the Christic force, and when we say Christic, we're not referring to the Christian religion. Let that be very clear. but to a universal stream of light that flows throughout the cosmos. What the life force expects from you is that all of you who are sensitive to our words, that all of you create beacons of light where you live. And all of these beacons of light will generate poles of attraction that will in turn change the planetary aura. When we refer to vibratory levels, we're first and foremost talking about a planetary aura that gradually induces a molecular changes in the matter of this world. As a humanity, do we have a price to pay? A kind of obligatory collective karma? Are we coming to the lowest point of the great cosmic pendulum? We cannot deny that the present earthly humanity shares a common karma, a collective karma. This is obvious. Few are those among you who have already extracted themselves from this karma, which doesn't mean they don't have their own individual karma. When we talk about collective karma, we can talk about the karma of a people, of a race, of groups that at a given time in history accumulated either an extremely uplifting potential or a rather leaden potential. The vast majority of you in this world share this type of karma in an extremely complex way. In this sense, yes, there's a collective karma to be washed. We don't like the term pay because you don't pay karma. There is karma to be cleansed. And in this sense, it's correct. There is a great test that humanity needs to go through, and this test hasn't yet passed. But this doesn't mean a punishment. The divine does not punish. The divine defines paths in which each one finds his place and works as he can. But yes, there's something to be washed collectively, and few are those of you who have extracted yourselves from this collective karma. They are what we could call the guides of your humanity. We're not necessarily talking about the great guides who have created great movements of consciousness, but there are guides here and there, some of whom are still partially riveted to this collective karma, and others are free from it, and are simply reincarnated to hold beacons and awaken those who can be awakened. But once again, there is no fatality in all of this, no fatality whatsoever. Each one must carry what he is capable of carrying. Each one must offer to the measure of what he's capable of offering, without anger, without hatred, and with great hope. Even if doors seem to be closing, and even if discouragement is around at every moment. We have said it many times, and it's been repeated over and over. All the great guides of humanity have traveled human paths before arriving at their place in eternity. No one can escape his own path, and that is a good thing. The celestial force does not offer graces like rewards, like candy canes to children. You are what you are, and what you have built yourselves with. And it's never too late, no matter how fragile you feel, to stand up and walk, even if the horizon doesn't always look very bright. It's not the first time in the history of mankind on this earth that portals of this nature need to be passed. Yet this portal is special in that it concludes the end of a cycle that is within another cycle that is still within another cycle. This is why it's important and why it's time to say, what do I want from myself? And in saying this today, we trust that we are repeating what we have delivered to you many times. But isn't it so that things must be repeated and repeated and repeated? Love can neither be bargained nor received on a platter. Love is something that is cultivated within oneself, that is called for, that is given. Are you able to say, I'm rich with all my love? Can you say it? It's not a matter of feeling guilty or feeling unworthy. It's a matter of saying, the love that I want to receive, am I able to offer it, and to what extent? Everyone has his measure, it's obvious. But at least you need to look at this love objectively and know what it means and see what it might imply in terms of momentary, quote-unquote, sacrifices. The word sacrifice isn't beautiful in its common meaning, but in reality, if we understand it from the inside, sacrifice is to make sacred. Do we want to make ourselves sacred? Perhaps some of you listening to us are thinking, but how many of us will have to die in this world in the decade or years to come? Is it true that such a percentage of humanity must disappear? Don't worry about this. And we're not going to enter into this type of debate and answers that often feed anxieties and questions that generate more questions, and the notion of fatality that really doesn't exist, etc. There's no point in talking about this. What is important to see is that those of you in this world today who are perhaps destined to fly away sooner than you might have imagined must understand that this portal that they are afraid of, and that the majority of you are afraid of, is just a portal and nothing more than this. A portal that every living being, not just human, has passed through thousands and thousands of times. The result is always the same. And as a brother who takes the lead in this group of three, all I'm saying is that the one you are deep within, not the one you seem to be, that one is. He does not exist, he is. What you are cannot be extinguished. And what you are has overcome a multitude of obstacles, sometimes very difficult ones, in the course of his or her existence. So don't lose sight of this. The light must be your rallying point. Stop living in fear, in anxiety. All living beings are where they should be. It isn't necessarily the easiest place to be, but once again, it is the best place for him or her. Everyone simply must strive to be true to themselves. I'm going to repeat myself because you asked me to reread the question separately. In 2012, you had announced the dates of 2030 to 2033 as the beginning of a way out of this major crisis. And now some governments are also announcing the famous date of 2030 as the plan of the Great Reset, the global plan for world reorganization. As far as we can see, and what is taking shape, this new social restructuring plan would have us go through a real apocalypse. Does this mean that we could remain in this situation, which is clearly eugenicist and genocidal tendencies, for another 10 years, and that we'll have to endure a growing dictatorship? I know that you've answered this. All of this depends on your free will and on your willingness to open your eyes ever wider. The word apocalypse does not mean, as many of you know, end of the world, but revelation. And not revelation in the singular. It should be understood in the plural, so as a multitude of inner revelations. Revelations about life, about the nature of life in this world, about the nature of life in other worlds, about accepting this, and also about the nature of life in you. It all depends on that. If the years 2030 to 2033 referred to mean anything, it would be in the case where too few of you became aware of the sacredness of life, of its origin and its destination, and where too few of you were to become aware of your duty to make freedom flourish in your world. No one can force anyone to blossom faster than their conscience allows them to. Do you already see a change in consciousness that is beginning? Or are there still too many souls who refuse to change and to evolve toward a rise in consciousness, toward a change for the better? Of course, and fortunately we are seeing a change in consciousness. But we can't say anything other than, of course, there's still too few beings who are open to change, because they can't understand what the word change induces. Change is nothing other than inner metamorphosis, and this cannot be inculcated. It is learned from within. And as with the term sacred, many beings who call themselves human today are unaware of the meaning of the word sacred. They know it technically or mentally, but they don't have the right perception, and they don't know what it means. And there are a number of rulers in your world today that are part of those for whom the notion of sacred simply doesn't exist, because simply those rulers are not human beings in the sense that you are. They come from other worlds and work with forces of dislocation. Yet they do have a divine spark within them, but that spark is still so dormant that they cannot pretend to be human. The form, the body, the brain have nothing to do with it all. Once you've understood this, tell yourselves that the freedom you aspire to has nothing to do with the freedom these beings are talking about and proposing, and which will go shrinking further and further. How far will you accept this narrowing? Not in violence, we hope, but in the modification of your level of consciousness. You must be aspirators who pull others upward. It's difficult because we're confined, locked up under curfews, and while we're trying, when we go shopping at the grocery store, when we hear people saying, oh, they're going to put us under lockdown and place curfews, and people are happy to be locked up in their bubble, happy to be deprived of freedom. So, if we need to shine to the outside world, but we're locked up at home, what can we do, us as humans who are beginning to see and know and realize everything that's happening, to create a collective awakening or the beginning of a spark in these people, so as to generate a collective stop to these genetic modifications they want to impose on us? And I dare not say all the words on the internet because we're censored. I'm talking about their great new project. The depriving of freedom, little sister, is the sign of insecurity and fear. All those who take comfort in the narrowing of what we conceive as being liberties are beings who are inhabited by fear and who have no horizon before them. No one will make them change through speeches, or extremely seldom. What effects change in those who invite fear and unconsciousness in them is the way of being of the most awakened among you. It's their radiance, but very little through explanations, because explanations very rarely reach the heart and essentially only reach the mind. It's your way of shining, it's your smiles and the peace that you radiate that will make that you attract around you a certain number of beings who have a spark that is a little bit stauncher and who want to open themselves even unconsciously to something else. This, of course, requires concrete actions. And since you just cited an example, you walk through a supermarket, you go through the aisles, and we can well imagine that a certain number of you have seen objects, vegetables, fruit, that have fallen on the floor, either by accident or out of carelessness. How many of you bend down to pick up an orange, a loaf of bread, or anything else from the floor and put it back on the shelf? That's where it all begins. These are things, you see, to which you need to be very sensitive and very careful. It's just one of 1,000 examples, but it's through these small details in your daily life that you can begin to sow change around you. What makes this person do such a gesture of generosity and respect? Because all begins with respect, and you will be seen differently. It's not much. In fact, it's very little in light of what's going on in the world. We very much agree. But it's with a multitude of small things that great things are built. Levels of consciousness are never tamed by great philosophical demonstrations or by the strokes of magic wands that you would receive as the chosen ones who have deserved something. It's the work of every moment. And that's how you will change your planet, through respect. And that is always, respect is always downstream from the sacred. Respect calls for a form of sacredness. There's nothing in this world, we say absolutely nothing, that does not have a spark of the sacred within. Even who or what seems to be the most abject being has necessarily a spark of the sacred within. It may be very, very, very weak and not brave enough to be deserving of the name human. But this being is there, and he or she is learning. And although you don't need to let yourselves be led by them, on the contrary, he is also there to learn. And it's a form of life that will be brought to grow, perhaps in hundreds of millions of years, but that represents nothing. We know that this will all make you dizzy, but dizziness is part of the law, not of evolution in the classical sense of the word, but of the law of transmutation on the cosmic level. Where you are in your progress, you who are listening to us, if you were not sensitive to these terms, which perhaps even seem too complex, it's these principles of transmutation that you must attempt to penetrate or invite within you. One last thing. Be confident. You're not going to lie to you by telling you that everything is very rosy ahead. You know very well this is not true. But there's always, always the light. And this should never be forgotten. Trust, 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 trust and love. Trust the sun with a capital S. Even at night, it's always there, and it continues to shine. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it has gone to sleep. The sun never sets, you know that. Receive all our peace.